She was pure. He, a man wounded by life. No one believed that this encounter would transform pain into true love. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because what happened between them will touch your heart. Rain drummed against the windows of the small physiotherapy clinic when Clara pushed through the glass door, shaking her drenched umbrella. Droplets ran down her chestnut hair, forming trails she wiped away with the back of her hand. The smell of antiseptic and eucalyptus filled the narrow corridor, mixed with the aroma of stale coffee coming from the reception area. It was Thursday, 4 o'clock. Clara was 24 and had never missed a single day of volunteering at the parish, but today she was here, covering for the receptionist who'd had to leave in a hurry. Her mother always said that helping was a gift, and Clara had never questioned it. Until this moment. In the corner of the waiting room, almost hidden among the green plastic chairs, a man stared at the rain with distant eyes. He had a day's stubble, broad shoulders curved forward, and a walking stick resting between his legs. He wore a worn military jacket, the kind that had seen better days. Clara felt something strange in her chest when she looked at him. It wasn't pity, it was something she couldn't name. "Next patient?" called Andrea, the physiotherapist, opening the treatment room door. The man didn't move. He continued staring at the storm outside as if searching for answers in the drops sliding down the glass. "Owen Blackwood," Andrea repeated, louder this time. He blinked, returning to reality. He stood with difficulty, leaning heavily on the stick. His right leg barely touched the floor. As he passed Clara, she noticed he smelled of plain soap and something metallic, perhaps medication. His eyes, blue like the sea on a stormy day, met hers for a second that seemed to last an eternity. Clara swallowed hard. She sat behind the reception desk, pretending to organize papers that were already perfectly organized, but her hands trembled slightly. 30 minutes later, Owen emerged from the physio room. His face was tense, a vein pulsing at his temple. Andrea accompanied him, talking about exercises and the importance of consistency. He just agreed with monosyllables, clearly wanting to be anywhere but there. "I need to reschedule my next session," Owen said, stopping in front of the desk. His voice was deep, hoarse, as if he hadn't used it in a long time. Clara searched for the diary, her fingers sliding across the pages. "Wednesday at 3 work for you?" "Works." She noted down his name, and when she went to hand him the confirmation slip, their hands touched. It was quick, accidental, but Owen pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second before he lowered his gaze. "Sorry," he muttered. "No. You don't need to apologize," Clara replied, feeling heat rising up her neck. Owen took the slip without looking at her again and left, limping into the continuing rain. He didn't open an umbrella, just walked, letting the water drench him completely. Clara stood watching until he disappeared around the corner. Something inside her had changed that afternoon, something small, almost imperceptible but irreversible. When she got home that night, her mother was preparing dinner. The smell of seasoned beans and fluffy rice flooded the small cottage. Her father was reading the newspaper in the sitting room, reading glasses balanced on the tip of his nose. "How was it at the clinic, love?" her mother asked, stirring the pot. "Normal," Clara lied, taking off her wet shoes. But it wasn't normal. Nothing about that day was normal. And while they ate dinner as a family, while her father commented on the poor harvest and her mother planned the next church jumble sale, Clara thought about stormy blue eyes and hands that trembled at touch. She didn't know it, but Owen couldn't stop thinking either. Sitting in the flat above the bakery, looking at the empty street below, he could still feel the ghost of that touch on the back of his hand. It had been 3 years since anyone had touched him with kindness. 3 long years since he'd returned from that hell abroad, carrying guilt and fragments of himself. Clara was light. He'd realized it immediately, and light shouldn't approach darkness. But fate, apparently, had other plans. The following weeks established a strange routine. Every Wednesday at 3, Owen arrived for physiotherapy. And every Wednesday, Clara found a reason to be at reception. They exchanged few words. He asked about times, she responded efficiently, but the silences between them screamed things neither dared verbalize. It was early April when Clara discovered, through Andrea, that Owen lived alone and had difficulty doing basic shopping because of his leg. The physiotherapist mentioned it casually over lunch, between forkfuls of salad. "It's sad, you know. A man still young, shut up in that flat. They say he was military or something. Some mission that went wrong." Andrea sighed, shaking her head. "But he doesn't talk about it." Clara chewed slowly, processing the information. That night, lying in the bed in the room she'd occupied since childhood, she stared at the ceiling and made a decision her version from 3 months ago would never have imagined making. The following Wednesday, after the physio session, Clara took a deep breath and approached Owen before he left. Can I talk to you for a minute?" Her voice came out higher than intended. Owen stopped, turning slowly. His expression was cautious, almost suspicious. "About what?" "I know it might not be my business, but I heard you have difficulty doing shopping." The words tumbled out. "I could help. Once a week I could pick up whatever you need from the supermarket. No obligation, just helping." The silence that followed was deafening. Owen stared at her as if she'd spoken in another language. His jaw tensed, his blue eyes darkening with something that looked like anger and vulnerability mixed. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice cutting. "Why would you do that?" Clara felt her heart racing. Because everyone needs help sometimes. And because I want to help." "You don't know me." "I know, but that doesn't change the fact that the offer stands." Owen gripped the walking stick handle tightly. His knuckles went white. For a moment, Clara thought he'd simply turn his back and leave. But then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. "Saturday," he said, his voice low. "If you really want to help, Saturday morning." He scribbled the address and a basic shopping list on a crumpled paper he pulled from his jacket pocket. When he handed it to Clara, he avoided touching her fingers. That Saturday, Clara woke earlier than necessary. She fixed her hair 3 times, changed her blouse twice. Her mother watched it all with a discreet smile, but said nothing. Owen's flat was on the 2nd floor of an old building. The staircase was narrow, the walls peeling. Clara climbed with 2 heavy bags, her heart beating hard. She knocked on door 2B. He opened after a few seconds. He wore a simple grey t-shirt and tracksuit bottoms. His hair was wet, as if he'd just got out of the shower. The flat behind him was small, but surprisingly tidy. "Come in," he said, stepping away from the door. Clara entered, her curious eyes scanning the space. It was austere. A single bed in the corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a bookshelf. But there were details. A guitar leaning against the wall, photographs of landscapes stuck up with tape, a plant trying to survive on the window ledge. "Where should I put these?" she asked, lifting the bags. "Kitchen, there." Clara headed for the tiny room. She began organizing the items while Owen watched from the doorway, leaning on his stick. The silence was heavy but not uncomfortable. "You brought cake," he commented, looking at the foil-wrapped package sticking out of one of the bags. "My mum made it. Victoria Sponge, she always makes too much, so—" Clara shrugged, feeling her cheeks warm. Owen took the package, opening it slowly. The sweet smell filled the flat. He closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them again, there was something broken in his gaze. "My grandmother used to make this cake," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Every week before everything." A single tear ran down his face. Owen wiped it away quickly, turning his face, but Clara had already seen. Something broke and reconnected inside her in that instant. Without thinking much, she approached and lightly touched his arm. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she said gently. Owen looked at her hand on his arm. He didn't pull away this time. "You don't understand what you're saying." "Then explain it to me." But he didn't explain. Not that day. They just stood there in the silence of that small flat, while the smell of Victoria Sponge enveloped them like a hug of distant memories. When Clara left, it was almost noon. Owen walked her to the door, moving with less stiffness than when she'd arrived. "Next Saturday?" she asked, hesitant. He nodded. "Next Saturday." And so it began. Every Saturday, Clara climbed those stairs with shopping bags and a piece of the outside world. And every Saturday, Owen opened a little more the door he'd kept locked for so long. May arrived bringing cold mornings and shy afternoon sunshine. The Saturday visits became the highlight of Clara's week, though she didn't admit it even to herself. Owen, for his part, began to wait for those moments with an anxiety that frightened him. It was the fourth Saturday when everything shifted up a level. Clara arrived as always, heavy bags in her arms. But this time Owen had made coffee. The small table was set with 2 cups, sugar, and even a clean cloth. "I thought that... Perhaps you'd like coffee before you go," he said, avoiding looking directly at her. "If you're not in a rush?" Clara blinked, surprised. Of course. I'd love to." They sat facing each other. The coffee was strong, bitter the way Clara liked it. They drank in silence for a few minutes, the sound of the street rising through the open window. "You work at the church, don't you?" Owen asked suddenly. "I've seen you a few times organizing things." "At the parish, yes, volunteering, jumble sales, events, those sorts of things." Clara stirred her coffee, thoughtful. "It's what I've done since I was a teenager." "Why?" The question was simple but loaded. Clara paused. "My parents have always been very involved with the community. I grew up seeing my mother help people, my father donating time and work. It seemed natural to continue." "Seemed." Owen caught the hesitation. Clara sighed. "Lately I've been wondering if I do it because I want to or because it's expected of me." "And what's the answer?" "I still don't know." The raw honesty in her voice caught him off guard. Owen leaned back in his chair, his blue eyes finally meeting her brown ones. "You're brave," he said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. "Most people spend their entire lives without asking that question." "I don't feel brave. Nobody does, but you're here, questioning, living. That's more courage than most have." Clara felt something warm spread through her chest. "What about you? Why did you come back here, to this town?" Owen's expression closed immediately. He looked away, his fingers gripping the cup tightly. "It's a long story." "I have time." "I don't know if I'm ready to tell it." Clara nodded, respecting his boundary, but then she did something bold. She extended her hand across the table and lightly touched Owen's fingers. He flinched but didn't pull away. "When you're ready, I'll listen," she said. Simple as that. That night, lying in her bed, Clara looked at the hand that had touched Owen. She could still feel the warmth of his skin, the rough scars she'd traced with her fingertips. She was in love. She finally admitted it to herself. Completely, irrevocably in love with a man she barely knew, but who seemed to occupy every thought. On the other side of town, Owen couldn't sleep either. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he looked at the journal he'd kept since returning. Pages and pages of written nightmares, of guilt recorded in blue ink. But in recent weeks, something different had begun to appear. Observations about Clara. The way she bit her lower lip when concentrating. The crystalline laugh that lit up any room. The unshakable kindness, even in the face of his curtness. He was falling in love. And this terrified him more than any battlefield ever had. June brought with it preparation for the summer fete, the biggest event of the year in the small village. Colourful bunting began to appear in the streets. The smell of strawberries and cream already perfumed the air even before the fete began. Clara was involved up to her neck in organisation, coordinating stalls and volunteers. One Tuesday afternoon, she found Owen in the bakery below his flat. He was sitting at a corner table drinking coffee and looking out the window. When he saw Clara, something softened in his expression. "Hi," she said, approaching. "Can I sit?" "Of course." Clara pulled out the chair, dropping her heavy bag on the floor. She was exhausted, dark circles marking her normally radiant face. "Working too hard?" Owen asked. "The summer fete is always hectic, but it'll be worth it." She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Have you thought about going?" Owen tensed. "I'm not really one for crowds." "I know, but it would be nice if you went." Clara fidgeted nervously with her hands. "With me, I mean, if you want." Owen's heart accelerated. She was inviting him, officially, clearly. He should refuse. should maintain the safe distance that would protect them both. But when he looked at those brown eyes full of hope, the words that came out were different. "I'll think about it." The smile that lit up Clara's face was worth any internal conflict he felt. But the peace didn't last. That same week on Thursday, a ghost from the past appeared. Owen was leaving physiotherapy when a man approached him on the street. Tall, dark-haired, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. The recognition was immediate and painful. "Morrison," Owen said, his voice cold. "Owen. Been a while." Morrison smiled, but there was no warmth in the gesture. "Heard you were in the area. Came to see if it was true. What do you want?" "To talk. About old times." Owen felt his stomach turn. "There's nothing to talk about." "I think there is." Morrison moved closer, lowering his voice. "You still carry it, don't you? The guilt, I can see it in your eyes." "Go away, Morrison. You saved 3 people that day, Owen. 3. But you still punish yourself for the 15 you couldn't save." Morrison shook his head. "Always been like that, taking on guilt that wasn't yours." Owen gripped the walking stick so hard his knuckles went white. "I said go away." "All right, but think about what I said." Morrison started to walk off, but stopped. "Owen, be careful with that girl you're seeing. Would be a shame if she found out what kind of man you really are." The words were a stab. Owen stood frozen on the pavement while Morrison disappeared around the corner, feeling old wounds open again. That night, when Clara stopped by his flat to drop off some extra supplies, an excuse to see him, she found Owen different. He was sitting in the dark, the whiskey bottle half empty on the table beside him. "Owen?" she called, concern coloring her voice. "You should go," he said, words slurred. "What happened?" "Nothing you need to know about. Just go away, Clara." But she didn't go. She entered the flat, turned on the light, and sat beside him. "Talk to me." Owen laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You want to know the truth, Clara? Want to know what kind of man I am?" "I know what kind of man you are." "No, you don't. You see what you want to see. A project. Someone to save. But I'm not salvageable. This isn't about saving you. I killed people, Clara." The words exploded from him. "Not directly, but my decisions. 15 people died because I wasn't fast enough, strong enough, smart enough." The silence that followed was thick. Clara absorbed the words, seeing for the first time the depth of the abyss inside him. "Tell me," she said gently. "Tell me everything." And he told her. Between tears and painful pauses, Owen narrated the humanitarian mission that had gone terribly wrong. The surprise attack, the impossible choice between saving one group or another, the lives he managed to protect and those left behind, the guilt that had devoured him since. When he finished, he was exhausted, broken before her. Clara approached and did something he'd never expect. She hugged him, strong, complete, without reservation. "You're not responsible for everything," she whispered against his chest. "Carrying this pain doesn't honor those who were lost. Living fully, that honors them." Owen collapsed in her arms, finally allowing years of pain to find escape. And Clara held him, being the anchor he needed to not drown completely. When the emotional storm passed, they stayed there on the floor of the small flat, Clara still holding Owen as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. "It's not about deserving. It's about choosing to be here." And she chose. Every day, against all logic, she chose this wounded man who was slowly allowing himself to be loved again. The summer fete arrived like an explosion of colors and sounds. The village green was transformed, bunting fluttering in the wind, stalls selling scones and clotted cream, the stage set up for Morris dancing performances. The smell of popcorn and candy floss competed with the sweet aroma of mulled cider. Clara was everywhere at once, organizing volunteers, solving last-minute problems, smiling at everyone despite the evident fatigue. She wore a summer dress her mother had made, floral cotton, with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt. Her hair was in 2 braids. Owen watched from afar, leaning against a tree at the edge of the green. He'd come, as promised, but the crowd made him tense. Too many faces, too much noise, too many memories of crowded places that ended in tragedy. It was Clara who found him, cutting through the crowd with determination. "You came," she said, and her smile was pure joy. "I said I would." "I know, but—" She looked around, noticing his discomfort. "It's a lot of people. If you want to leave, I understand." Owen took a deep breath. No, he didn't want to leave. Not when Clara was there, radiant and beautiful, looking at him as if he were the only person who mattered. "Stay with me?" he asked, and there was vulnerability in his voice. "I'll stay, but stay with me." Clara intertwined her fingers with his without hesitation. Always. They walked through the fete together. Clara explained each stall, introduced Owen to people with evident pride, laughed when he complained the cider was too strong. Gradually, Owen relaxed. Clara's hand in his was a constant anchor, reminding him he was safe. When the music started, a lively folk tune that made everyone move toward the center of the green, Clara looked at Owen with bright eyes. "Dance with me?" "Clara, my leg. I know. We'll improvise." And they improvised. Clara adjusted the steps naturally, transforming his physical limitation into something unique. They danced slowly while others spun quickly around them, but for them the world had shrunk to fit only in each other's eyes. It was there, under the colorful bunting and the starry sky, that Owen realized something fundamental. He wasn't just falling in love. He was already completely in love. And this changed everything. The next day, Sunday, the bomb dropped. Clara received a call from the vicar responsible for the parish. There was an opportunity, coordinating a larger social project in a neighboring town 2 hours away. It would be a promotion, recognition of her work, a chance to make a difference on a larger scale. But it would require moving. She stood paralyzed with the phone in her hand for long minutes after the call ended. Her mother, watching from the kitchen, dried her hands on her apron and approached. "It's a great opportunity, love," she said gently. "I know." "But you're hesitating." Clara looked at her mother, eyes brimming. "He's here, Mum. Owen is here, and if I go—" Her mother sighed, pulling her daughter into a hug. "Love sometimes requires difficult choices. How do I choose between the work I've always dreamed of and the person I love? Only you can answer that, my love." Clara spent the following week in agony. She didn't tell Owen about the proposal immediately, struggling internally with the decision, but he noticed something was wrong. She was distant, lost in thought. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was Wednesday, during his physio session, that Owen confronted her. "You're different," he said when they were alone at reception. "What happened?" Clara bit her lower lip. "I received a job offer in another town." Owen's heart sank. "Is it a good opportunity?" "It is." "Then why do you look so sad?" "Because it would mean being away from you." The words came out raw, honest. "And I don't know if I want that." Owen was silent for a long moment, processing. Part of him wanted to beg her to stay, but the part that still thought himself unworthy of her spoke louder. "You should go." Clara blinked, shocked. "What?" "It's your career, Clara, your future. You can't throw that away for me." "It's not throwing it away, it's choosing. Choosing me would be a mistake." Owen stood, leaning on his stick. "You deserve more than being stuck in this town, looking after a broken man." "You're not broken." "I am, and you deserve someone whole, someone who can give you a real future." Tears ran freely down Clara's face now. "You don't understand. I don't want someone else. I want you." Owen felt something break inside him. He approached her, took her face in his hands, looking deep into the brown eyes that made him want to believe in impossible things. "And I want you more than anything in this world. But sometimes loving someone means letting them go." He kissed her then, finally, inevitably, a kiss full of desperation and love and goodbye. Clara clung to him, kissing back with equal intensity, trying to memorize every sensation. When they separated, both were crying. "Don't ask me to do this," Clara whispered. "Don't ask me to choose between you and my career. It's not fair. I know it's not, but it's right." Clara left with her heart shattered, not knowing what decision to make. And Owen stayed, convinced he was doing what was best for her, even if it destroyed him inside. The days that followed were the most difficult Clara had ever faced. She moved through life on autopilot, woke, worked, ate, slept, but everything seemed colorless. Her mother watched with growing concern, but respected her daughter's silence. The deadline to respond to the job offer was approaching. 3 days, she had 3 days to decide the course of her life. On Tuesday, Clara finally talked to her father. They sat in the small back garden where he grew tomatoes and runner beans. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of the apple tree. "Dad," she began, her voice hesitant, "how did you know Mum was the right person?" Her father paused in his pruning work, looking at his daughter with those wise eyes that seemed to see through things. "I didn't know," he replied honestly, "but I chose to believe she was. And every day since, I choose again." "But what if I choose wrong?" "There's no wrong choice when you choose with heart and head in agreement." He sat beside her. "What does your heart say, Clara?" "That I love Owen, that I can't imagine my life without him." "And your head?" "Says the opportunity is too good to refuse, that it would be irresponsible to throw away years of work." Her father nodded, thoughtful. "What if there's a third option?" "What do you mean?" "You don't have to choose between love and career love. Perhaps there's a path where both coexist." The words planted a seed. Clara spent the rest of the day thinking, planning, imagining possibilities that before seemed impossible. Meanwhile, Owen was sinking. Without Clara's Saturday visits, without the casual meetings during the week, the flat seemed emptier than ever. He'd gone back to drinking, not much, but enough to numb the constant pain in his chest. It was Andrea, the physiotherapist, who intervened. During a particularly difficult session, she confronted him. "You're self-sabotaging," she said without preamble. "I can see it from a mile away." "I don't know what you're talking about. I know you and Clara had something, and I know you pushed her away." Andrea crossed her arms. "Why?" Owen didn't respond, focusing on the stretching exercises. "Do you think you don't deserve to be happy?" she continued. "Or are you afraid that deserving happiness means forgiving yourself?" The words hit home. Owen stopped. His breathing accelerated, not just from physical effort. "She deserves more," he said finally. "Let her decide that." Andrea knelt beside him, forcing eye contact. "You're robbing her of the chance to choose, and robbing yourself of the chance to be happy. That's not noble, Owen. It's cowardice." The truth hurt more than any physical injury. Andrea was right. He was hiding behind self-sacrifice when really he was just afraid. That night, Owen made a decision. He sat down and wrote a letter. Pages and pages of words he'd never managed to say aloud. All the truth about his feelings, his fears, his transformation since Clara entered his life. He ended with something simple but powerful. "If you choose me, even knowing everything I am, I'll spend the rest of my life becoming worthy of that choice." Wednesday morning, Owen went to Clara's house for the first time. The small yellow cottage with blue shutters, the well-kept garden, the feeling of home that emanated from every brick. He knocked on the door, his heart beating irregularly. Clara's mother opened, surprised to see him, but there was kindness in her eyes. "Owen, come in, please. I came to deliver this." He extended the letter. "For Clara, if she wants to read it." Her mother took the letter, studying his face. "She's in her room. Want to go up?" Owen hesitated, then nodded. Clara's room was exactly as he'd imagined, simple but welcoming, with floral curtains and photographs on the walls. She was sitting on the bed, looking out the window, and when she heard the knock on the door, she turned. The shock at seeing him was visible. "Owen, I know I asked you to forget me," he said quickly before courage failed. "But I was wrong. Wrong about everything." Clara stood, her hands trembling. "What are you saying?" "That I love you. Completely, desperately. And that being without you these past days has been worse than any injury I've ever had." He took a step forward. "That if you choose me, I'll spend the rest of my life becoming the man you deserve. You're already that man. You just don't see it." Owen pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her hair, breathing the scent of lavender that haunted his dreams. "Don't go. Please don't go." "I'm not going," she whispered back. "I've already decided I'm going to refuse the offer." No. Owen pulled back to look in her eyes. Don't refuse. We'll find a solution. Together. And there, in that simple room, they began to plan a future that included both. The solution came from where they least expected. During a conversation with Andrea, Owen mentioned casually that he had experience working with trauma and recovery. The physiotherapist stopped mid-stretch. Have you ever thought about working in that? Formally, I mean. Owen blinked. I don't have qualifications, but you have experience, lived, real. Andrea sat, animated. There are training courses, certifications. You could help other veterans, people with physical and emotional trauma. The idea took root. Owen researched, discovered training programs, possibilities he'd never considered. And the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. Transform his pain into something useful. Use his scars to help others heal theirs. Clara, for her part, had a difficult but necessary conversation with the parish vicar. She explained her situation, her love for Owen, her desire to continue making a difference but in a different way. To her surprise, the vicar was understanding. Sometimes God shows us paths we didn't expect, my child, and true love is always a worthy path. He made a counter-proposal, that Clara develop social projects locally, with possibility of future expansion, but without the need for immediate relocation. It would be different from the original plan, but still significant. June turned to July. The weather cooled. Mornings brought mist from the hills. Owen started a trauma therapy certification course 3 times a week in the neighboring town. It was challenging, stirred old wounds, but also offered tools to deal with them. Clara, now officially his girlfriend, a term that made them smile every time they used it, began developing a psychological and spiritual support project for the community. They sometimes worked together, complementing each other's skills naturally. But not everything was roses. There were obstacles. There were Owen's extended family, whom he hadn't seen in years, reappeared after they heard through mutual acquaintances that he was rebuilding his life. His mother called one Saturday afternoon, her voice full of contained emotion. "Owen, my boy, it's me." The silence that followed was thick. Owen held the phone with a trembling hand, Clara beside him offering silent support. "Mum," he finally said, his voice hoarse, "I know I have no right to call after so long, but when I heard that you were better, I had to try." She paused, clearly fighting tears. "I'm sorry, for not knowing how to help when you came back, for pulling away when you needed me most." Owen closed his eyes, memories flooding. His mother had tried to help at first, but he'd pushed her away with such violence, such misdirected anger, that eventually she'd given up, and he'd never blamed her for it. "It wasn't your fault," he said. "I didn't let anyone help. But I should have insisted. I'm your mother." Her voice broke. Can I see you? Get to know you again?" Clara squeezed Owen's hand, encouraging. "Yes," he replied. "You can come. I'd like that." The reunion happened a week later. Owen's mother, Eleanor, was an elegant woman in her early 50s, graying hair in a bun, blue eyes identical to her son's. She brought with her Owen's father, a quiet but strong-presenced man, and the younger sister he barely remembered, now a grown woman. It was strange at first. Years of silence don't dissolve in an afternoon, but Clara, with her natural kindness, helped break the ice. She made coffee, served the cake her mother had sent, kept conversation flowing when silences became too heavy. Gradually, the family began to reconnect. Eleanor talked about the years that passed, changes in the family, regrets she carried. Owen, in turn, spoke about Clara, about therapy, about plans to work helping others. "You seem different," his mother observed, eyes shining with emotion. "Lighter." "I am different," Owen agreed, looking at Clara. "She helped me see that carrying the past doesn't mean it has to define me." When the family left, with promises of regular visits and dinner planned for next month, Owen felt strangely complete. Pieces of his life he thought lost forever were coming back together. But the biggest change was still to come. It was late July when Owen received an official letter. The humanitarian organization he'd worked for sent a formal apology, recognition that the circumstances of the failed mission weren't his fault, and testimonies from people he'd saved, families he thought hated him, who actually were deeply grateful. He read the letter 3 times, sitting on the bench in the park where Clara found him after finishing work. "What is it?" she asked, noticing his state. Owen handed her the letter, wordless. Clara read, and with each line understood more. When she finished, she looked at him with eyes full of happy tears. "Do you see? Do you see what I've always seen?" She held his face in her hands. "You're a hero, Owen. You always were. I didn't save everyone. Nobody can save everyone. But you saved who you could, and that's everything." Something broke inside Owen in that moment. The last chain binding him to the past simply dissolved. He cried, there in the park, in Clara's arms, releasing years of self-imposed guilt. And for the first time since returning from that distant country, Owen felt that maybe, just maybe, he deserved the second chance life was offering. August arrived with cold winds and the promise of deeper changes. Owen was in the middle of the certification course, Clara expanding the community project, and both navigating the still new waters of a serious relationship. Everything seemed to finally be falling into place, until it wasn't. The first crack appeared when Owen started having nightmares again. They weren't new, the same ones that had haunted him since his return, but now, with life finally improving, they seemed more violent, more real. He woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, screaming names of people he couldn't save. Clara, who had started sleeping some nights in his flat, something that caused gossip in the village but both ignored, was witness. She held him when the tremors passed, whispered words of comfort, but could see something was worsening. "You need to seek professional help," she said one morning after a particularly bad night. "Someone specialized in trauma." "I'm doing fine," Owen insisted, stubbornly. "No, you're not." Clara wasn't accusing, just being honest. "And that's okay to not be okay, but you need to seek real help, Owen. Not just the courses, actual therapy." Owen resisted for weeks, pride and the old belief that he needed to solve everything alone speaking louder. But the nightmares worsened, and with them came growing irritability. The explosion happened on a Saturday afternoon. Clara was organizing community project papers on Owen's table. He arrived from physiotherapy, visibly frustrated. His leg was worse, constant pain affecting his mobility. "I need that table," he said without preamble. "Oh, sure. Just let me finish." "Now, Clara, I need the table now." She blinked, surprised by his tone. "Owen, just give me 5 minutes to—" "Why are you always here?" The words exploded from him. "Always in my spaces, always touching my things, always trying to fix everything." Clara went pale. I was just helping. I didn't ask for help. I never asked you to come into my life and turn everything upside down." The silence that followed was cruel. Clara gathered her papers with trembling hands, eyes brimming but head held high. "You're right," she said, her voice controlled. "Sorry for presuming you wanted me to stay." She left without looking back. Owen stood frozen in the middle of the flat, anger draining and being replaced by horror at realizing what he'd just done. In the days that followed, Clara didn't answer calls, didn't respond to messages. Owen tried to visit her, but her mother politely but firmly said Clara needed space. "You hurt her, Owen," Clara's mother said, without malice but with truth. "And she needs to decide if she can trust you again." Owen sank into a downward spiral. The nightmares worsened. He missed 2 sessions of the certification course, stopped eating properly. His leg became inflamed again, this time seriously. It was his sister, Stella, who found him 3 days later. She knocked on the door insistently until he opened. "My God," she gasped, seeing his state. "Owen, you're a mess." "Go away, Stella." "No." She entered, pushing past him. "I'm not letting you destroy yourself again." Stella was small but determined. She forced Owen to shower while she cleaned the flat, made food, and then sat in front of him and said the words that needed saying. "You're self-sabotaging because things were getting too good." It wasn't a question. Owen didn't respond, but the truth was written all over his face. "You need professional therapy, brother. Not tomorrow, not next week, now." Stella grabbed his phone and started searching. "And you need to apologize to Clara, not with empty words, but by showing you're willing to do the necessary work to be the man she deserves. His sister's words were the wake-up call Owen needed. That same night, he called a therapist specializing in PTSD, booked an appointment for the next day, early. But before he could apologize to Clara, fate threw another curve. Owen's leg, which had been worsening, became severely infected. The fever came quick and high. Stella found him delirious in the flat and called an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors talked about possible sepsis. They'd need to admit him. Heavy antibiotics, constant monitoring. Owen was too weak to protest. It was Stella who called Clara. "He's in hospital," she said without preamble. "Serious infection. Doctors say he'll be fine, but he's asking for you." Clara was silent for a long moment. Part of her wanted to say no, protect her still wounded heart. But the bigger part, the part that loved him despite everything, couldn't imagine Owen alone and frightened in a hospital room. "I'm coming," she replied. When Clara entered the hospital room, Owen was sleeping. He looked small in the bed, connected to tubes and monitors. There were bruises from IV access points, pale skin, sweat on his forehead. She sat in the chair beside the bed and took his hand. Owen woke slowly, confused by medication, but when he saw Clara, his eyes filled with tears. "You came," he whispered, his voice weak. "Of course I came. I'm so sorry. So sorry." Tears ran freely. "I ruined everything. Ruined it because I was afraid of being happy. I know. And you hurt me. A lot. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up, if you give me the chance. I don't want compensation." Clara leaned closer. "I want you to take care of yourself, really. Therapy, treatment, the whole process. Because I love you, Owen. But I can't be your only anchor. You need to do the work for yourself, too." Owen nodded, understanding. "I booked a therapist, starting next week if they discharge me." "Good." Clara smiled for the first time, small but genuine. "And what about us?" "Us?" The hope in his voice was almost painful. "I'm not going to lie and say everything's fine. It's not. You hurt me and it'll take time to rebuild trust." She took a deep breath. "But I believe in you. I believe you can change, grow. So I'm staying. But with boundaries." Owen understood. Boundaries were more than fair after what he'd done. "Anything, whatever you need." Clara stayed at the hospital for the next 10 days, slept in uncomfortable chairs, fed Owen when his hands trembled too much from medication, read aloud when the drugs left him confused and frightened. Both families took turns bringing home-cooked food, support, and prayers. It was in the early hours of the 8th day, when the fever finally broke and Owen was more lucid, that he said something that would change everything. "I love you," he whispered, looking in her eyes. "Not in the desperate, dependent way from before, but the way you deserve. As a conscious choice every day to be better for you and for me." Clara felt something release in her chest. "I love you too. And we'll get through this. Together." And for the first time in days, both truly believed it. September arrived, bringing the first spring flowers and the feeling of new beginnings. Owen was discharged from hospital with an extensive care list, strict medication, intensified physiotherapy, and most importantly, weekly therapy with a psychologist specializing in PTSD. The first session was brutal. Sitting in a room with a stranger and unwrapping layers of trauma wasn't easy. Dr. Harrison, a middle-aged man with thick-framed glasses and a gentle manner, didn't push, but also didn't allow Owen to run from difficult questions. "You tend to punish yourself for things outside your control," Dr. Harrison observed in the third session. "Have you stopped to think why?" "Because if I'd been better, faster, smarter," Owen began, the automatic response. "That's arrogance disguised as guilt." Owen blinked, surprised. "What do you mean?" "You're assuming you had total control over a chaotic and unpredictable situation, that if you were perfect enough, you could have saved everyone. That's placing superhuman responsibility on yourself." Dr. Harrison leaned forward. "You're human, Owen. Humans have limits." The words planted seeds. Owen began to question narratives he carried as absolute truths. It was a slow, painful process, but necessary. Meanwhile, Clara maintained the boundaries she'd established. They saw each other regularly, but she no longer slept at his flat. They met for coffees, walks, dinners with families. They were rebuilding trust brick by brick. "How are you?" Owen asked one Sunday afternoon, sitting on their favorite park bench. "Better," Clara replied honestly. "Still hurt, but seeing you do the work, really try, helps." "I never want to hurt you like that again." "You'll probably hurt me again. Not like that, I hope, but relationships have small wounds." She took his hand. "The difference is how we deal with it." Owen intertwined his fingers with hers. "I'm learning. From you, from Dr. Harrison, even from my mum. I'm learning it's okay not to be perfect." "You were never perfect, Owen, and I never asked you to be." Clara smiled. "I want you real, with flaws, with effort, with growth." The news came on a Thursday afternoon. Owen was finishing a physio session when Andrea called him to her office. There was a gleam in her eyes he couldn't decipher. "Remember that proposal I mentioned months ago, about you working helping other veterans and people with trauma?" she began. "I remember." "The clinic wants to make it official." Andrea smiled broadly. "They want to expand, create a specific physical and emotional rehabilitation program. And they want you to be part of the team, after you finish the certification course, of course." Owen was speechless. Seriously?" "Completely serious. Your experience, both personal and the course you're doing, plus the therapy you've shown commitment to. You're perfect for this." Andrea leaned over the desk. "And there's more. Clara, too. They want her coordinating the administrative aspect and complementary emotional support." It was perfect, frighteningly perfect. Owen could barely believe it. That night he and Clara celebrated with a simple dinner at his flat. Owen cooked, pasta with sauce his mother had taught him, nothing elaborate but made with care. "To us," Clara toasted with grape juice, "and to new beginnings." "To us," Owen echoed. But as they ate and talked about future plans, Owen felt something growing inside him, something he'd been building for months, that was finally ready to be said. "Clara," he began when they'd finished eating, his voice slightly trembling, "I know we're still rebuilding. I know hurt takes time to heal completely, but I need to tell you something." She watched him, curious and slightly apprehensive. "What is it?" Owen stood, took something he'd hidden in the drawer. It wasn't a ring. Not yet. That would come when the time was right. It was a small notebook, leather-bound. "This is a journal I started when you came into my life." He handed it to her. "It has everything. My thoughts, my fears, every moment that made me realize I was falling in love. And at the end, there's a promise." Clara opened the notebook with trembling hands. She flipped through some pages, eyes filling with tears as she read his raw, honest words. When she reached the last page, she found something written in careful letters. Tears ran freely down Clara's face when she finished reading. She lifted her eyes to Owen, who watched her with a mixture of hope and terror. "It's everything I wanted to hear," she whispered. Owen pulled her into a hug, and there, in the small kitchen of that flat that had witnessed so much pain and transformation, they held each other as if they were the only solid thing in a constantly changing world, because they were. For each of them, the other had become anchor, safe harbor, and above all witness to the process of becoming someone better. October brought heat and humidity. Flowers bloomed in profusion, and with them, new challenges neither had anticipated. Clara began feeling morning sickness. At first she attributed it to stress. The project was growing, demands increasing. But when the nausea persisted for 2 weeks, a terrible suspicion began to form. She bought a pregnancy test at a chemist 2 towns over, where nobody knew her. She locked herself in the bathroom at home on a Saturday morning while her parents were at the farmer's market. 2 lines. Positive. Clara slid to the cold bathroom floor, the test still in her hand, the world spinning around her. Pregnant. She was pregnant. The terror that flooded her was visceral. They weren't married. The traditional community would make cruel judgments. Her parents would be devastated. And Owen. God, Owen was only just beginning to heal. How would he react? She kept it secret for 3 days, struggling internally. She tried to rehearse conversations, imagine reactions, but all words seemed inadequate. It was Owen who noticed something was wrong. "You're strange," he said one Wednesday afternoon after his physio. Distant. "I'm just tired. Clara," he held her chin gently, forcing eye contact. "Don't shut me out. Not again. What's happening?" And the floodgates opened. Clara began to cry, deep sobs that shook her whole body. Owen pulled her into his arms, alarmed. "Love, tell me. Let me help." I'm pregnant." The words came out in a muffled whisper. Owen froze. For 1 second, 2, 3. He didn't move. Clara felt her heart shatter, already imagining rejection, panic, abandonment. But then Owen pulled her back slightly, just enough to look in her eyes. And what Clara saw there wasn't fear. It was wonder. Joy. Love so intense it took her breath away. "You're pregnant," he repeated, as if testing the words. "We're going to have a baby." You're not angry?" "Angry?" Owen laughed, a sound wet with tears. "Clara, you're giving me the greatest gift I could receive. Why would I be angry?" "But we're not married. The town will talk. Your parents. I don't give a damn what the town will say." Owen wiped the tears from her face with his thumbs. "And as for our parents, they'll adjust. But what matters, what really matters, is us, and this baby." "Are you sure?" Clara asked, vulnerable. "Because it's a huge responsibility and—" Owen silenced her with a kiss. When they separated, he was smiling through his own tears. "Marry me," he said, breathless, without ring, without any preparation. "Not because you're pregnant, but because I love you more than anything in this world. Because I want to build a family with you, want to wake every day beside you, want to be the father of our child. Owen, I know I don't have a ring now, that this isn't romantic or planned, but it's real." He knelt right there, on the pavement in front of the clinic. "Clara, will you marry me?" People passed, some stopping to watch. Clara didn't care. She pulled Owen back up. He still had difficulty kneeling, and kissed him deeply. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. 1,000 times yes. But the joy was short-lived. Telling the families would be the next challenge. Clara's parents reacted exactly as she feared. Her father was in stormy silence. Her mother cried tears of disappointment. Not because they didn't like Owen, but because they dreamed different for their daughter. "We raised you with values," her mother said, voice trembling. "And now I'm building my own life," Clara replied, firm despite tears. "With the values you taught me, but in my own way. And you can be part of this or not. The choice is yours." It was difficult, painful, but necessary. Owen's family, surprisingly, was more receptive. Eleanor embraced Clara immediately. "Welcome officially to the family," she said, smiling through happy tears. "We'll support you in everything." But the biggest obstacle was still to come. Clara's pregnancy brought complications: high blood pressure, risk of preeclampsia. Doctors recommended bed rest, constant monitoring. She had to drastically reduce work on the community project, something that frustrated her immensely. Owen, for his part, struggled with increasing pressure. Finishing the certification course, starting the new job at the clinic, preparing to be a father, all while still doing weekly therapy. There were nights when he felt he'd sink under the weight of everything. It was on one of those nights, 2 weeks after the proposal, that Owen had a severe panic attack. Clara found him on the bathroom floor, hyperventilating, clutching his chest. "I can't," he gasped. "I can't do this. Be a father, husband, professional. I'll fail you, the baby, everyone." Clara, despite her own fear, stayed calm. She sat beside him on the cold floor and took his trembling hands. "Breathe with me," she instructed, demonstrating deep breaths. "In. Hold. Out." It took 15 minutes for Owen to calm down. When he could finally breathe normally, he was exhausted, ashamed. "Sorry," he murmured. "Don't apologize for having feelings." Clara stroked his face. But Owen, tomorrow you call Dr. Harrison. This was the third nightmare this week. I know. I'm not nagging. I'm just being your partner, reminding you what you need to do for yourself. Owen nodded against her hair. That was the difference. Clara wasn't trying to save him anymore, just walking beside him while he saved himself. Dr. Harrison, in the next session, helped Owen develop strategies to deal with growing anxiety. Grounding techniques, breathing, cognitive restructuring. You don't need to be perfect, Dr. Harrison reminded. You just need to be present and willing to learn. Clara, for her part, had difficult but necessary conversations with her mother. Gradually, with patience and honesty, they began to rebuild the bridge the pregnancy news had shaken. I just wanted to protect you, her mother confessed one afternoon. From pain, from judgment, from difficulties. I know, Mum. But some things I need to face myself. Well, not myself. With Owen. Her mother nodded, wiping tears. He really loves you, doesn't he? Like I never imagined being loved. And that, in the end, was what mattered. November arrived, bringing torrential rain and the decision to marry soon. Clara was in her third month of pregnancy, her belly still discreet but beginning to show. They didn't want to wait, not when they already knew they wanted to spend their lives together. It was a simple wedding. The small village church filled with family, friends, and curious onlookers. Clara wore the wedding dress her mother had kept for decades, adjusted with love and tears to accommodate her growing belly. The white lace fabric told its own story of promises and hopes. Owen, in a modest but impeccable suit his mother insisted on buying, waited at the altar. His hands trembled visibly when Clara began walking down the aisle to the sound of the church's out-of-tune organ. She was beautiful, her chestnut hair in loose curls, wildflowers intertwined, her smile radiant even with brimming eyes. And the belly, small but present, carrying their future. When they met at the altar, Owen couldn't contain his tears. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "You're trembling," she replied with a wet smile. "I'm terrified," he admitted, honest. "Me too. But we're together." The ceremony was moving. The vicar, who'd known Clara since childhood, spoke about love that transforms, about forgiveness and second chances. When it came time for vows, Owen and Clara had written their own. "Clara," Owen began, his voice breaking slightly, "you found me when I was lost. You didn't try to fix me, but gave me space to heal. You taught me that deserving doesn't come from perfection, but from continuous effort. I promise to be your partner every day in joys and difficulties. I promise to be a present father for our child. I promise to continue doing the work of being better. And I promise to love you, not despite your imperfections, but including them." There wasn't a dry eye in the church. Clara took a deep breath, wiping tears before beginning. "Owen, you challenged me when I needed to be challenged. You showed me that following my heart isn't weakness, but courage. With you, I learned that true love isn't just feeling, but daily choice. I promise to be your partner in all moments. I promise to give you space to grow even when it's difficult. I promise to create a home where our child knows they're unconditionally loved. And I promise to love you every day with all the honesty and truth I have." The rings were exchanged, simple, silver, engraved with their initials. When the vicar finally said, "You may kiss the bride," Owen and Clara kissed under collective applause and tears. The reception was at Clara's parents' house, simple, with home-cooked food prepared by dozens of hands, live music from a local folk band, modest but love-filled decorations. Both mothers cried. The fathers drank to the couple's health. Friends danced in the small area set up in the garden, and at the center of it all, Owen and Clara spun slowly, just them in the middle of the crowd, a complete world unto themselves. "Happy?" Owen asked, lips near her ear as they danced. "Completely," Clara replied. "Scared too, but happy. Two feelings can coexist. I learned that from you." Later, when the party was winding down and they could finally sit, Stella approached with a wrapped box. "Wedding present," she said, smiling. Owen and Clara opened it together. Inside was a photo album, already begun. The first pages had photos of them, some they didn't even know existed. Owen leaving physio with Clara waiting outside. Them on the park bench, hands intertwined. At the hospital, Clara holding sleeping Owen's hand. "I thought it would be good to document," Stella explained, emotional. "Your journey from the beginning." Clara hugged her sister-in-law, overwhelming gratitude. "It's perfect." That night, on their first day as husband and wife, Owen and Clara didn't go on an elaborate honeymoon. They returned to the small flat, tired but happy. "Mrs. Blackwood," Owen said, testing the name. "Still getting used to it," Clara admitted, smiling. Owen placed his hand on her belly, reverent. "And soon there'll be 3 of us." Scared. Terrified? He looked in her eyes. But also hopeful. "For the first time in years, I'm hopeful about the future." The clinic proposal materialized the week after the wedding. Owen and Clara would be partners in the new rehabilitation program. He with lived experience and the completed course. She with her organizational skills and natural empathy. They worked together, transforming an empty wing of the clinic into the space. Walls painted in soft colors, motivational posters, a cozy reading corner. Every detail thought through so people in recovery would feel safe. Owen's first patient was a 40-year-old veteran, amputated leg, eyes empty of hope. Owen sat before him and said simply, "I know how it is, and I know it seems impossible now, but I promise it's not." And he showed his own leg, the scars, the way he still limped, but also showed the life he'd built despite it. The veteran cried, and then began to talk. Really talk, for the first time since the amputation. Clara watched from afar, her heart tight with pride. This man who months ago could barely look people in the eyes, now offered hope to another broken human being. The transformation was complete and still happening. That night, lying in the bed they now officially shared as husband and wife, Owen traced gentle circles on Clara's belly. "I thought of something today," he said in the dark. "What?" "That maybe my mission didn't go wrong. Maybe it led me exactly where I needed to be." He paused, choosing words. "To find you, to become someone who can help others, to this life." Clara turned to face him, even in the dimness. "Do you really believe that?" "I'm learning to believe." He smiled, and even in the dark she could feel the sincerity. "Dr. Harrison says reframing trauma is part of healing. Maybe this is it." "I like that version of the story," Clara whispered, kissing him gently. The days transformed into weeks. December came with intense heat and Clara's belly growing visibly. She was 5 months along, and the baby had started kicking. The first time Owen felt the movement, his eyes widened in pure wonder. "It kicked," he said, amazed. "Our baby kicked." "Or she," Clara corrected, laughing. "Or she." Owen pressed his face against her belly. "Hi, baby. This is your dad. Just wanted you to know we already love you so much. And we're learning, but we promise to do our best." Clara ran her fingers through his hair, emotion choking her throat. Moments like this made everything they'd been through worthwhile. The rehabilitation program grew quickly. In just 2 months, they had 8 regular patients, and the waiting list was growing. Owen discovered he had a natural talent for it, knew exactly when to push and when to pull back, when to speak and when to just be present. Clara complemented perfectly, organizing support groups for families, coordinating community resources, creating support networks that extended beyond the clinic walls. "You're an incredible team," Andrea commented one afternoon, watching them work. "You know that, right?" They exchanged glances and smiled. Yes, they knew, but not everything was perfect. Owen still had bad days, when the ghosts came back stronger. Clara still struggled with anxiety about approaching motherhood. But the difference now was they faced it together, with honesty and without fear of asking for help when needed. It was on one of those difficult nights, when Owen woke from a particularly violent nightmare, that Clara showed how much she'd learned too. "Need to talk about it?" she asked, turning on the bedside lamp. Owen shook his head, still trembling. "Just stay with me. Always." She pulled him into a hug. "But Owen, tomorrow you call Dr. Harrison. This was the 3rd nightmare this week." "I know. I'm not nagging. I'm just being your partner. reminding you what you need to do for yourself. Owen nodded against her hair. That was the difference. Clara wasn't trying to save him anymore, just walking beside him while he saved himself. Christmas came hot and festive. Both families gathered for the first time at Clara's parents' house, now completely reconciled with the marriage. The table was abundant, laughter plentiful, and at the center of it all, Owen and Clara, pregnant and radiant. To family, Clara's father toasted, eyes moist. The one we're born into and the one we create. To family, everyone echoed. That night when everyone had gone, Owen and Clara sat on the porch watching the stars. Next year there'll be 3 of us on this porch, Clara said dreamily. And in coming years, this child will drive us mad, will challenge us, will make us question everything. Owen smiled. And it'll be the best thing that ever happened to us. You're going to be an incredible father. I'll make lots of mistakes. Yes, probably, Clara laughed, but you'll be present, and in the end, that's what matters. Owen pulled her closer, his hand resting protectively on her belly. The baby kicked, as if recognizing the paternal touch. And there, under the December starry sky, they were no longer just 2 wounded people who found each other. They were a family. Imperfect, under construction, but real and full of love. January 2026 brought torrential rains and the intensification of Braxton Hicks contractions. Clara was enormous, uncomfortable, and impatient to meet the baby growing inside her. She was 37 weeks, and doctors said it could start any moment. Owen was hyper-vigilant. He checked Clara constantly, had the hospital bag ready and reviewed 3 times, studied everything about childbirth he could find. Dr. Harrison joked that he was more anxious than the pregnant woman herself. You need to breathe, Clara said one afternoon, seeing him check the bag for the 4th time that day. Just making sure everything's... Owen. She held his face in her hands. Everything's ready. You're ready. We're ready. But he didn't feel ready. How could anyone feel ready for such responsibility? For a small, fragile human being who would depend completely on them. The real contractions began on a Tuesday, 2 in the morning. Clara woke to a different pain, more intense, more rhythmic. She nudged Owen. Love, I think it's time. Owen jumped out of bed as if electrocuted. Now? Really? Okay. The bag is... Where's the bag? Breathe, Clara said, laughing despite the pain. At the door, remember? The journey to the hospital was a blur. Owen drove with excessive care, stopping completely at all traffic lights, even at 2:30 in the morning with deserted streets. Clara held the door handle, breathing through contractions that came closer and closer together. Are you all right? Owen asked for the 10th time. I'm in labor, not dying. She smiled to soften the words. But speed up a bit, please. At the hospital, everything happened fast and slow at the same time. Clara was admitted, examined, taken to the delivery room. 3 centimeters dilated. She still had a long way to go. Owen didn't leave her side for a second. He held her hand through each contraction, wiped sweat from her forehead, whispered encouragements when the pain became unbearable. I can't, Clara cried at the 8th hour, exhausted and in pain. It's too much. I can't. You can. Owen held her face. You're the strongest person I know. If I could survive the hell I went through, you can bring our baby into the world. That was the worst motivational comparison ever, Clara said, but laughed despite tears. Hey, I'm trying. He kissed her forehead. We breathed together, remember? Like you taught me when I had panic attacks. And so they did. Through each contraction, they breathed together. Owen being the anchor she'd been for him so many times before. It was 18 hours total. 18 hours of growing pain, of exhaustion, of moments where Clara thought she couldn't bear it. But Owen was there, steady as a rock, being the strength she needed. Crowning, the midwife announced finally. Clara, on the next push you're going to meet your baby. One final contraction, a scream that seemed to tear the world in half, and then crying. The most beautiful crying either of them had ever heard. It's a girl, the midwife announced, placing the tiny being on Clara's belly. Owen couldn't breathe. He stared fixedly at the minuscule child, covered in vernix and blood, but perfect. Absolutely perfect. 10 fingers on hands, 10 on feet. Dark hair like his, eyes squeezed shut, but when they opened for a second, they were brown like Clara's. "A girl," he whispered, tears running freely. "We have a daughter." Clara laughed and cried at the same time, holding the baby against her chest. "Hi, little one. Hi, my love. We've waited so long for you." The nurse eventually needed to take the baby for cleaning and checks. Owen went along, unable to let her out of sight. He watched every procedure, asked about every measurement, memorized every detail. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, the nurse announced. 19 inches, all reflexes normal. A completely healthy baby. When they returned the child wrapped in a pink blanket, Owen held her for the first time. The weight was insignificant, but the responsibility was overwhelming. He looked at that perfect little face and felt something inside him completely reorganize. "Hi, princess," he whispered. "I'm your dad. And I promise to be the best father I can be. I'll make mistakes. I'll definitely make mistakes. But I'll always love you. Always be here." The baby gripped his finger with surprising strength. And in that moment, Owen finally understood what redemption meant. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about honoring it by creating a better future. It was about this child, this new life that knew nothing of his scars, who would only know a present, loving and committed father. "What should we call her?" Clara asked when Owen returned the baby to her. They'd discussed names for months without deciding, but now looking at their daughter, Owen knew. "Sophie," he said. "It means wisdom, and she's going to teach us so much." "Sophie," Clara repeated, testing the name. "Sophie Blackwood. It's perfect." The families arrived in an avalanche. Eleanor cried, holding her granddaughter. Clara's father took dozens of photos. Stella wouldn't stop talking about being an auntie. The hospital room filled with balloons, flowers, and overflowing love. But the most significant moment came when everyone had left, and it was just the three of them. Owen sitting in the chair beside the bed, Sophie sleeping in his lap, Clara watching with a tired but radiant smile. "We did this," she said, amazed. "You did this. I just held your hand." "No, we did it. Everything. From that first meeting at the clinic to now." Clara extended her hand, and Owen held it. "We grew together, transformed together, and created this." Owen looked at his sleeping daughter, so small and trusting in his arms. A year ago he was a broken man convinced he didn't deserve happiness. Now he held the entire universe in his arms. "Thank you," he said to Clara, emotion thick in his voice. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For showing me I could be more than my mistakes. For this life." He smiled through tears. "For everything." Clara wiped her own eyes. "You would have got here anyway." "Maybe, but it would have taken much longer, and wouldn't have been so complete." Owen kissed Sophie's head gently. "You saved me, Clara, in the ways that matter." "And you freed me," she replied. "Showed me it's okay to choose a different path from what's expected." That night, while Sophie slept in the hospital cot and Clara finally rested, Owen stayed awake, just watching, memorizing, recording every detail of that moment, because he knew it was the kind of moment that defines an entire life. He'd survived war, survived trauma, survived crushing guilt, and now, finally, he was doing more than surviving. He was living. Really, fully living. And it all started with a young woman with gentle eyes who refused to see only his wounds. The first months with Sophie were simultaneously the most wonderful and most difficult of their lives. Sleepless nights, unexplained crying, constant fear of doing everything wrong. Owen and Clara navigated parenthood as they'd navigated the relationship, together with honesty and lots of coffee. It was March. Sophie was 2 months old when the first major crisis happened. Owen was alone with the baby for the first time. Clara had gone to the doctor for a postnatal checkup, and he'd assured her everything was under control. Sophie was sleeping after all. What could go wrong? Everything. Everything went wrong. Sophie woke screaming. Hunger, Owen thought. He warmed the bottle Clara had prepared, tested the temperature, offered it. Sophie spat it out and screamed louder. Nappy, then. Changed the nappy. Still screaming. Wind? Tried all the positions they'd taught. Nothing worked. And then, after 40 minutes of inconsolable crying, something inside Owen broke. The noise, the helplessness, the feeling of total failure. Everything converged, triggering memories of situations where he couldn't help, people screaming he couldn't save. He put Sophie safely in the cot and left the room, closing the door. He sat in the hallway, head in his hands, hyperventilating. The baby's crying still echoed, but distant, and mixed with it, sounds of explosions, screams in foreign languages, the chaos of that terrible day years ago. That's how Clara found him 20 minutes later, on the hallway floor, in full panic attack, while Sophie cried in the room. "Owen?" She ran inside, picked up the baby, checked she was all right, then returned to her husband. "Love, look at me. Owen, look at me." It took time, but eventually he came back, eyes focused on her, breathing gradually slowing. When he could finally speak, his voice came out broken. "I couldn't." She cried, and I couldn't do anything. Tears of frustration and shame. What kind of father can't calm his own daughter? The kind of father who's human. Clara sat beside him, Sophie already calm in her lap. "Babies cry, Owen, sometimes for no apparent reason. It's not your failing." But I left her crying. I ran away. You stepped away to avoid doing something worse in the middle of a panic attack. Clara forced eye contact. That was responsibility, not cowardice. It doesn't feel like it. I know, but it's the truth. She touched his face gently. "You're calling Dr. Harrison today. This isn't a suggestion." Owen called. And in the emergency session that same day, Dr. Harrison explained about PTSD triggers related to feelings of helplessness, about how parenthood can activate old traumas in unexpected ways. "You're not a bad father," Dr. Harrison said firmly. "You're a father with not completely processed trauma, and we need to work on that." They intensified the sessions. Twice a week now. They worked specifically on strategies for when he felt overwhelmed with the baby, created action plans, code words for when he needed help, specific grounding techniques. But the incident left a mark. Owen began doubting himself again, and when he doubted, he withdrew, not physically but emotionally. Clara noticed, but in the extreme tiredness of the first months with a newborn, didn't have energy to confront it. It was Owen's mother, on one of the weekly visits that had become tradition, who confronted him. "You're hiding," Eleanor said bluntly, while rocking Sophie. "I'm not." "Yes, you are. I can see it in your eyes." She looked at her son. "You had one bad day, and now you're punishing yourself, pulling away from them." "Mum, you don't understand." "I understand more than you think," she sighed. "Your father had his demons too, Owen, and he also pulled away when he thought he wasn't being good enough. You know what that caused? Distance. Years of distance we never completely recovered." The words were a stab. Dad never talked about that. Because he was ashamed. Like you are now. Eleanor stood, placing Sophie in his arms. "Don't make the same mistakes, son. This girl doesn't need perfection. She needs presence." That night, when Sophie slept and they finally had a moment alone, Clara addressed the elephant in the room. "You're distant," she said without accusation, just observation. Owen didn't deny it. "I'm afraid of hurting her, not physically, but emotionally, of being like my father was with me." "Did your father love you?" "Yes, but did he hit you? Neglect you?" Clara asked directly. "No. He just was always distant, emotionally. And you're doing intensive therapy precisely not to repeat that." Clara moved closer. "Owen, you can choose to be different, but you need to really choose, not just say you choose." The words echoed his mother's. Two women he loved, saying essentially the same thing. Maybe they were right. The turning point came the following week. Sophie had colic, crying inconsolably at 3 in the morning. Clara was exhausted, having been awake most of the night. "I'll get her," Owen said, getting up. He took his daughter in his arms and immediately felt the familiar panic beginning to rise. The loud crying, the helplessness, the triggers activating. But this time, instead of running, he used what he'd learned. Breathing, 5 senses. Identify where you are, daughter's room, safe at home. What can you see? Blue cot, star mobile, Sophie's face red from crying so much but healthy. What can you hear? The crying, but also Clara's breathing in the next room, the tick-tock of the clock. What can you feel? Sophie's weight, her warmth, her soft pajamas. It was still difficult but not impossible. It's all right, Sophie, he whispered, rocking her gently. Daddy's here and I'm not leaving. Even when it's difficult, even when you cry and I don't know what to do, I stay. That's the promise. It took 30 minutes, but Sophie eventually calmed. And when she finally slept in his arms, Owen felt something monumental. He hadn't just overcome his daughter's colic. He'd overcome his own demons, again, and would overcome them many more times. Because being a father wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present. And he was learning to be present even when everything inside him screamed to run. The next day, in a session with Dr. Harrison, Owen shared the experience. I'm proud of you, the therapist said, genuine. That's real growth. I'm still afraid of failing her. For you will fail. Many times, all parents do. Dr. Harrison leaned forward. The difference is you recognize your failures, work on them and stay present. That's all a child really needs. April brought more challenges. Clara went back to part-time work, and dividing Sophie's care responsibilities with both their professional schedules was a constant puzzle. They argued about parenting methods, about who was more tired, about small things that seemed huge under sleep deprivation. It was in one of those arguments that everything exploded. You're not helping enough, Clara said, frustrated after another badly slept night. I work full-time and still wake every night, Owen retorted, and I also work and still do everything around the house. Because you don't let me help. Every time I try to do something, you say I'm doing it wrong. The silence that followed was thick, both panting, realizing it wasn't really about household chores. It was about stress, exhaustion, and the brutal adaptation that parenthood demands. Sorry, Clara said first, sitting heavily on the sofa. I'm so tired. Me too. Owen sat beside her. And I think we're taking it out on each other. We need to be a team again. We never stopped being, just forgot for a moment. They talked, really talked, about expectations, about division of tasks, about needing to ask for help when necessary. They created a better system, more balanced, and more importantly, they remembered they were on the same side. The definitive emotional climax came in May when Sophie was 4 months old. Owen received an unexpected call. One of the men he'd served with on the humanitarian mission was in the area and wanted to meet him. Ricardo, the same one he thought blamed him for the deaths. Owen hesitated, but Clara encouraged. You need that conversation to completely close that chapter. The meeting was at a cafe in the town center. Ricardo looked different, older, obviously, but also lighter. When he saw Owen, he smiled genuinely. Blackwood. Been a while. They sat. The first minutes were tense, full of small talk about nothing important, until Ricardo went straight to the point. I came to apologize. Owen blinked, confused. What? For the years I let you think I blamed you. Ricardo stirred his coffee. I was dealing with my own trauma, and ended up blaming you because it was easier than facing that we both did the best we could in an impossible situation. I don't know what to say. You saved my life that day, Owen. Saved 3 of us. And yes, 15 people died, but it wasn't your fault. Not mine. Not anyone's except the monsters who caused it. Ricardo found his eyes. And it took years of therapy to accept that. But now I do. And I needed you to know. Tears ran freely down Owen's face now. Years of guilt, of crushing weight, finally beginning to dissolve. I saved you too, he asked, voice broken. Carried me 3 miles with a bullet in your shoulder. Ricardo smiled through his own tears. So yes, you saved me. They talked for hours, shared their healing journeys, the therapies, the difficulties. Ricardo had met a woman, married, had 2 children, worked helping veterans too. Their lives had followed parallel paths of reconstruction. You look well, Ricardo observed eventually. I am. Finally. Owen showed photos of Clara and Sophie. I have a family now, a reason to keep doing the work of being well. Then something good came from all that. Something very good. When they said goodbye with promises to keep in touch, Owen felt as if finally, definitively, he could let the past rest. Not forget, never forget, but carry it without allowing it to define every step. He returned home and found Clara giving Sophie a bath. The domestic scene, so simple and perfect, made him stop in the doorway just watching. His wife singing softly while washing their daughter, the baby laughing at Bubbles, sunlight coming through the window illuminating everything. "Hey," Clara said when she noticed his presence. "How did it go?" "It was liberating." Owen entered, kneeling beside the bath, "and made me realize something." "What?" He looked at Clara, then at Sophie. "That I finally truly deserve this, not because I'm perfect or because I've erased the past, but because I did the work, because I choose every day to be someone worthy of you." Clara kissed him gently. "You always were worthy. You just needed to believe it." And there, in that small bathroom with his family, Owen finally believed. 1 year after that first meeting at the clinic, Owen was on the same park bench where so many important moments had happened. But now he was holding Sophie, 10 months old, who tried to reach the pigeons pecking breadcrumbs on the ground. Clara arrived minutes later, with ice cream for both. She sat beside them, the small moment of pause in the middle of a busy Saturday. "I remembered something," she said, licking the strawberry ice cream. "What?" "It's been exactly a year." She looked at him with a smile. "A year since you finally accepted my help with shopping." Owen laughed. "Seems like a lifetime ago, and at the same time like it was yesterday." Sophie chose that moment to take her first steps, 3 wobbly steps before falling on her bottom and laughing. Both parents froze, then exploded in celebration. "She walked!" Clara shouted, picking up their daughter and spinning. "I filmed it!" Owen waved his phone triumphantly. The moment was perfect in its simplicity. There was no dramatic music or cinematic sunset, just a normal family celebrating a normal milestone. But for them, it was extraordinary. That night, after putting Sophie to bed, they sat on the small balcony of the flat they now planned to exchange for a house with a garden. "Are you happy?" Clara asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "More than I ever imagined possible." Owen kissed the top of her head. "I still have difficult days." "I know, but they don't define me anymore." He looked at the stars. "I learned I can carry scars and still be whole, that I can have past wounds and still build a beautiful future. I'm proud of you, of the man you've become. I couldn't have done it alone." "But you did the work." Clara sat up to look in his eyes. "I just offered support. The transformation was all yours." The rehabilitation program was thriving. They had 15 regular patients now, a 2-month waiting list, and plans to expand to include family therapy. Owen had completely embraced his role, finding purpose in transforming pain into help for others. Clara coordinated not just the administrative aspect, but had initiated support groups for wives and families of patients. She found her own calling in creating community and collective healing. "Remember when you almost made me accept that job in another town?" Clara asked suddenly. "My biggest mistake." "And my biggest test," she smiled, "because I had to really decide what I wanted, not what was expected of me." "Do you regret it?" "Not for a second." Clara intertwined her fingers with his. "We built something better together, something that wouldn't exist if I'd followed the original plan." Weeks transformed into months. Sophie grew, passing from baby to small child who ran everywhere and spoke single words. The flat became too small, and they finally bought a modest house on the village outskirts. It had a small garden where Sophie could play, an extra room they transformed into a shared office, and a porch where they watched the sunset. The family expanded in other ways too. Both sets of parents, previously distant, now were constant presence. Eleanor visited every week, helping with Sophie and sharing recipes and family stories. Clara's mother and she had completely rebuilt their relationship, now based on mutual respect beyond maternal love. It was one September afternoon, almost 2 years after the first meeting, that Owen had a surprise. He arrived home and found Clara crying in the kitchen, holding something in her hands. His heart sank. "What happened?" He ran to her. Clara lifted her face, and he realized she was smiling through tears. "I'm pregnant. Again." Owen was breathless. "Really?" "Really." She laughed, wiping tears. "We didn't plan it, but it's happening." He pulled her into a tight hug, laughing along. Sophie, who was playing in the sitting room, ran to them shouting, "Mummy, Daddy," without understanding what was happening but wanting to be part of it. "You're going to be a big sister," Owen said to their daughter, picking her up. Sophie clapped without comprehension, but happy to see her parents happy. That night, lying in bed after Sophie slept, they talked about the future with a calm they wouldn't have had 2 years ago. "Nervous?" Clara asked. "Terrified." Owen laughed. "But different from before. Now I know I'll make mistakes, and that's okay. That I don't need to be perfect, just present. We've learned so much. And we'll learn more. With this new baby, with Sophie growing, with life." Clara turned to him. "You know what's amazing?" "What?" 2 years ago you could barely look people in the eyes, and now you're helping others heal your father to a wonderful child and going to be a father again." She touched his face. "The transformation is complete." "Not complete. Continuous," Owen gently corrected. "Always in process, always growing, but yes, transformed." The second baby was born in May, a boy they named Lucas. Sophie, now 2.5, was enchanted with her baby brother, though sometimes with typical child jealousy. Lucas's birth was calmer than Sophie's. Owen had no panic attacks, was present and calm, being the support Clara needed. When they held their son for the first time, there was a peace that hadn't existed with Sophie. Not because they loved more, but because they already knew they could do this. The family of 4 now filled the house with noise, chaos, and abundant love. There were toys scattered, nappies being changed at impossible hours, arguments about education and boundaries, but also constant laughter and moments of pure joy. Owen and Clara learned to navigate parenthood together. When one was overwhelmed, the other compensated. When both were exhausted, they asked families for help without shame. They'd built a solid support network and knew how to use it. The rehabilitation program continued growing. They began receiving regional recognition, requests to speak about their methods, interest from other clinics in replicating the model. Owen became a local reference in trauma work, his own story giving credibility and hope to patients. Clara published an article about family support in rehabilitation processes that was accepted in a specialist journal. She discovered she liked writing, systematizing learnings to help others. It was on a Sunday afternoon, 3 years after the first meeting, that they had the moment that encapsulated the whole journey. They were in the park. Sophie played on the swings, Lucas crawled on the grass under watchful supervision, and Owen and Clara sat in the shade of a big tree. "Remember that first time you touched me?" Clara asked suddenly. "At the clinic, when you handed me the slip?" "How could I forget? I pulled back like I was being burned." "Because you were," she said, wise. "Being burned by the possibility of connection when you only knew isolation." Owen nodded, thoughtful. "I was so lost, convinced I didn't deserve anything good. And now?" He looked around. Sophie laughing on the swing, her dress spinning. Lucas discovering grass for the first time, fascinated. Clara beside him, still beautiful, now with some laughter lines that weren't there before, each one telling a story of the life they'd built. "Now I know deserving is something we build. It's not about being perfect or without a past. It's about choosing every day to be better." He took her hand. "You taught me that. You taught yourself. I was just alongside." Sophie ran to them at that moment, followed by Lucas, who crawled surprisingly fast. "Daddy, push the swing," she asked, pulling his hand. "Does Lucas want to?" Clara asked, picking up their son. "Yes, baby brother too." They went together, all 4 to the swing. Owen pushed Sophie gently while Clara held Lucas in her lap, swaying slightly. Sunlight filtered through tree leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow on the grass. Children laughed around, other parents chatted. Life happened in all its common and extraordinary glory. "You know what I think?" Owen said, looking at Clara. What? That scars don't disappear. Mine, physical and emotional, are still here. He touched his leg that still limped slightly. But they tell a story now, of survival, of transformation, of love that heals without erasing. Clara kissed him gently, not caring about the children or other people in the park. And what a beautiful story it is. When they returned home that afternoon, tired but happy, they put the children to bed together. A story for Sophie, a song for Lucas. Then they sat on the sitting room sofa, simply existing in the comfortable silence that only truly connected couples know. "Thank you," Owen said eventually. "For what?" Clara asked, drowsy against his shoulder. "For that first moment of kindness. For not giving up when I tried to push you away. For showing me I could be loved even carrying storms." He kissed the top of her head. "For choosing to build this life with me. I thank you too." Clara sat up to look in his eyes. "For having the courage to open up. For doing the necessary work. For showing me that true love isn't perfection, but constant presence." They hugged, there in the simple sitting room of the house they bought together, surrounded by evidence of a shared life, photos on the wall, forgotten toys in the corner, the organized mess of a real home. And in that embrace there was completeness. Not because there would be no more challenges, there always would be. Not because they were perfect, they never would be. But because they had each other, they'd grown together, and they'd proven that scars can be transformed into strength when treated with love and patience. Owen and Clara built more than a relationship. They built a family, a purpose, a life that honored both the lights and shadows of their journeys. And they did it together, step by step, choice by choice, day after day. Years later, when they told their story to their grown children, they wouldn't speak of a fairy tale where everything was easy. They'd speak of truth, that real love is work, that healing is process, that family is built with presence and commitment. But they'd also speak of small miracles, of how a gentle touch can begin to melt ice around a wounded heart, of how choosing to stay, even when it's difficult, can change everything, of how two imperfect people can create something perfect in its imperfection. The story of Clara and Owen wasn't about a princess saving a prince or vice versa. It was about two human beings who found each other in their most vulnerable moments and chose to grow together, who transformed pain into purpose, scars into wisdom, and wounds into points of deep connection. And in the end, they proved the most fundamental truth of all, that even coming from darkness, we can choose the light, that even carrying immense weight, we can learn to walk again, that even thinking we don't deserve love, we can be loved completely. Because true love doesn't fix us, it offers us safe space to fix ourselves, and in that process, we transform into versions of ourselves we didn't even know were possible. Clara and Owen lived that truth, and in living it they created not just a family but a legacy of hope for all who once felt they were too broken to be loved, too lost to be found, too wounded to be healed. Light always finds its way through the cracks, and sometimes the cracks are exactly what we need to finally let the light in.